on Friday, Mr. McCarthy is going to send an email out to all the teachers saying, hey, if you would like to vote on the hallway decorations and the fences and who wins, feel free to do so. And he sends it out to all the staff members, and some people respond, some people don't. Meister always responds because I think it's my favorite. The Friday morning is like my favorite day of the school year. I think it's so fun to walk through the hallways. Am I right? Especially when you're not here the night before, right? Like I'll leave at 3:00 on Thursday and come back and the whole building is transformed. It's seriously my favorite day of the year. It's so fun. And it's such a cool tradition. So let's say I would like to listen to students' decisions on which ones were the best. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a random sample of my students and ask them which ones do they think is the best. Everybody with me? Like the basic premise of this. Do you think that's a good idea? Can you guys all tell me who will lose if I take a random sample of my students to judge the hallways? Why are the freshmen going to lose? I can't handle freshmen, man. Like, they're so squirrely. They're like, you know what I'm saying, right? But I haven't taught freshmen in a long time for a reason. Because they're little. And they just can't sit still. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so aren't all the upperclassmen going to make fun of the freshmen and say the freshmen did a terrible job? There was 1 year that didn't happen. And they did make fun of the hallway, but the fence. You guys remember Bella Donahue? Was she your?
Oh yeah.
She was there when you guys were freshmen. Was
her sisters in our grade. So.
Yeah, when Bella could crush the fence. Like I've never. And that year nobody made fun of the freshman fence because Bella just went to town and it was great. But overall, every year the freshmen don't know what they're doing. You know what I'm saying? It's their first year. They don't know how much to, really jump in on it. Cool? All right. So we've decided that if I wanted to get a true reflection of students' feelings, asking my students is a bad idea. What if I just go down to study hall and I take a group of students from study hall? Would that be a good sampling method? Who would lose in that particular case? Most likely. Seniors, because? No, but none of the seniors stay for study hall, right? I mean, some do, but not really, right? Are we good? And frankly, juniors would be very heavily underrepresented in that sample too, right? Okay, so no. Should I ask a random sample of staff members? Would that be fair? It would be more fair than the previous two, which were intentionally written to be very bad samples, right? So what if I said maybe? Would that be okay? Because, yeah. And then, let's say I had a good sample, whether it be the staff members or a random selection of students or whatever, okay? I also have to think through, what am I going to ask them? Which hallway is the best? Which class was the most creative in their theme? Which class was the most committed to their theme? How do you measure which one is the best? What variables do I want to consider? So, are you guys with me that designing a statistical study is very challenging? Cool? Okay. So, in order to, I'm just going to put lots of variables here. It's hard because we have a lot of variables that we might want to consider. Okay? Maybe the seniors have a bigger budget because they all have jobs and stuff. Or more likely to have a job than freshmen for sure, right? Yeah, there's all these things that would be really challenging to kind of navigate as we design this study. Okay? All right, so in any time we do a study, we have a population and then we have samples. So a population if I ask you guys, not necessarily what is a population, but what is the difference between a sample versus a population, how many of you would feel comfortable answering that question? Like, what is a sample versus what is a population?
The sample is a small group of the population.
It's a subset of the population.
The population is kind of like the total or something.
The entire, I'm going to say in quotes, group of interest. Okay. Have you heard of a census before? What's a census? Give us a shout, Skylar.
Asking a population of people questions. Yeah. I mean, there's.
You keep going. You're good. You're good.
Census is like asking a bunch of people, almost everybody.
The attempt of the United States Census is to ask the entire population. Whether or not it does so is actually a decently political issue, okay? But the goal of the census is to study, is not necessarily to sample people, but rather to take every single person and count them and count different qualities about them. Their residential status, their socioeconomic status, the race, all those kinds of things are recorded in the United States Census. But the goal is that it is every single person, okay? That is the census, which is an attempt to be a census, and a census is just a study of the entire population. So let's say I wanted to ask staff members their opinions on the hallway. Would it be reasonable for me to get a census of the staff members? Yeah. I could very easily walk into every classroom, every office, and hit every adult in this building. Would it be reasonable for me to do a census of the students? Probably not as much, because I don't know if you guys know this, but teenagers, like if I sent out like a survey on y'all's email, do you know what the response rate would be? It would be very tiny. Because kids don't, even the ones who read their emails, y'all don't respond to emails very much. You guys know what I'm saying, right? How many of you have checked your email today? How many of you have written an email today? How many of you had an email that you maybe should have responded to in your email? Yeah, it's fine. We all know it. If I really needed to get information from you guys, there's no way I would do it over email. I would do a Google form where I'm standing behind you guys, watching you fill it out to make sure it gets done. You guys get what I'm saying there? Okay? So, So when we can't do a census, we might take a sample and use that sample to represent the population. Everybody good? And when we take a sample to represent a population, we call that generalizing. The values from the sample are generally applied to the population. Everybody good? All right. We have two main types of statistical studies we're going to be dealing with. We have observational studies and experiments. An observational study is it's a study in which participants are not manipulated. Now, when I say manipulated, I don't mean the negative connotation of manipulated, okay? In an experiment, participants are manipulated through treatments. And in fact, you guys, I did an experiment on you guys earlier this school year. Remember the Nate and AJ photo? And I used Nate and then AJ with you guys, but then I used AJ and Nate with the 7th period class. Okay? I manipulated you guys. You didn't know I was manipulating you, and I don't think it was a, evil manipulation, right? That was a pretty innocuous one. Okay? That would be an example of manipulating through a treatment. Okay? And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to kind of look at this unit in 2 different ways, in 2 different sets of ideas conceptually. The first is sampling designs and how we make sure our sample represents our population. And then the next one is experimental designs. How do we make sure we can conclude and what we can conclude from experiments versus just an observational study. If I give you guys a survey, am I manipulating you in any sort of way? No, surveys are a statistical design that is an observational study. If I look at, what if I looked at your grades from, you're just calculated the mean and tried to make some conclusions based on your grades on the Unit 2 test? Did I manipulate you in any sort of way? Not more than just giving a test, right? That would be an observational study. Every study has factors. Let's jump down to explanatory and response variable first. Okay, kind of like when we were talking about the scatter plots, the explanatory variable is like what you might think about as the independent variable. Where the response variable is the dependent. And usually what we're looking for is changes. We tend to look for changes in the response variable. And what a factor of a statistical study is a variable related to the response variable. Things you might consider on top of just the explanatory and response variables. So, for example, who has the best hallway? But maybe we should consider the fact that the seniors all are more likely to have jobs and have more money to commit to the hallway. You guys kind of get the... How are we doing on this vocabulary? Does this feel fairly reasonable over some time? So one of the things I'm going to ask that you do frequently, you know how we have to include context in our answers. Understanding in a study what the response variable is going to be really important to truly do the best communication on the things that we're going to need to do in this unit. Okay, so always keeping in mind what a response variable is kind of important. So today we're going to then talk about some problems, some ways that bias can creep into a study. Okay. We're going to talk about different kinds of bias. All right, first of all, bias in the statistical sense has a very specific meaning. The first thing about bias is it's systematic. So when we talk about bias in statistics, we're not talking about somebody's personal biases. Okay? We are talking about the design of the study systematically influencing the response variable. I would call that a response bias because you're more likely to. Now, so if I wanted students' opinions, maybe what I do is I go get students from a different school. What do teenagers think? Maybe picking teenagers who actually decorated the hallways, that would be problematic. Does that make sense? And bias in a statistical study does not have to be intentional. In fact, most of the time when it does show up, it is not intentional. Okay, nobody wants to have a bias study because then your results are not good. You can't trust your results if you have a bias study. All right, so can I tell you guys a quick story about a half marathon that I ran that relates to this first example, or this first type of bias? So I've been a competitive runner, I've been a runner who competes is a much better way than saying competitive runner since 8th grade. And, as you get older, you don't necessarily have like a running team that you run for anymore. So I go and run 5Ks, and more I realize, especially as I've gotten old, I don't have any foot speed. My only hope is that I can last longer than most people. So I run half marathons, okay? And so when it comes to half marathons, I don't even know what the number is anymore, but I'm only going to tell you about one of them, okay? It was run in Washington, D.C., which on its own I was like super excited because I haven't, other than this half, I hadn't been to D.C. since I was in the 2nd grade. And so I was like excited to go sightseeing and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things about running half marathons is they always run by the cool sites. Like, it's my favorite way to visit a city because they take the races, they intentionally plan those courses around some of the cooler neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. It's super fun. And so I leave Columbus and I get, almost to the Pennsylvania line, and I realize I forgot my running shoes, which is kind of important in a race. And I was like, it doesn't matter, there'll be this big expo, I'll buy a new pair of running shoes, right? It's fine. Mine are ready to be replaced in the next 100 miles anyway, it's fine. So I buy my new pair of running shoes. And I met my twin there, and we ran the race, right? So first thing is we get to the race, and I have this backpack full of stuff. So like I have change of clothes, all that kind of stuff. So we don't want to go back to our hotel after the race because it's like 30 minutes each direction. We just want to jump into sightseeing. So I have to change clothes, all that kind of stuff. And so most of the big races have these. They have a gear check stand, right? You drop off your bag, and they keep it, and they order it by your race bib number, right? So they're holding onto my bag for me. No, in this bag, I also happen to have my car keys because I didn't want to run with them. You guys get my wallet. I had an ID on me and a credit card, and that was it. Okay, so we drop off our bags. We go to the start, and if you've ever been to the start of a race, there's porta potties everywhere, and they're there for a reason because people will overhydrate, or not overhydrate, but they prehydrate quite a bit, and you have to go to the bathroom. So we're walking up, and I'm like, I should probably go to the bathroom. And I get to the bathroom, and the line's like gajillion people long. And I was like, I'm going to miss the start. I'll go to the one at the first mile mark, right? Because in the first couple mile marks where they have the water stands, there's plenty of bathrooms, porta potties. So I get to the first one, and there's a padlock on the door. So you guys can start to feel how this is going, right? So I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm a teacher. We're used to, being able to make it a long time before visits. And so I go another 2 miles, next porta potty. Bathroom's left. Ran another 2 miles, finally find a bathroom. It was great. When we get to about mile 10, we go to the water stop. The water stop ran out of water. And in fact, every water stop till the end of the race was out of water. No problem. I only have 3 miles left. I can do this, right? I have a water bottle in my bag. So then I go to get my bag with my car keys and my water bottle and my wallet. They lost my bag. I had to stay at the finish line for an extra 2 hours in case they found my bag, which they did. Because I was bid number 13,000 and something, and they had filed it under bid 1,300 and something. So you guys are starting to get, I don't get mad very often. Like, it takes a lot for me to get really mad. Can you guys imagine what I might have been like after this experience? Cool? Alright, so eventually they find my bag. We get out of town. It was like, we got back to our hotel, everything was great. No big deal. And I was inconvenienced for a couple of hours on top of, you know, I bought the wrong pair of shoes, like my legs fell apart. Like, it was not a good race experience. I've had some pretty crummy ones, and this one is by far the worst. By far. Okay. So, at the end of like a week after the race, and this is very common for every race. In fact, I just got one of these for the 5K we did last weekend. They send you a survey saying, what did you like about the race? What did you not like about the race? And much like high school students, I don't fill out those surveys. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? Guess which one I filled the survey out for? I did for that DC race. Did you guys kind of get the vibe? Okay. So if I'm the race organizer and I want to get people's opinions on how the race went, and I send an email out to everybody, how many positive responses do you think they got to that email? Like, not very many at all, right? How many negatives do you think they got? A lot. Okay. That is an example of a voluntary response sample design where you say, like, hey, pop on by if you want to give me your feedback. And here's the deal. By nature, problematic in my opinion, but by nature, we're way less likely to spread positive feedback than negative feedback. Do you guys get what I'm saying there? So, a voluntary response bias happens, this is when people choose to be in a sample. And what happens is, the reason that's a problem is people with stronger and more negative opinions will come out. So if I'm that race organizer and I only look at the feedback from that survey, I'm going to think I did a really crummy job. And you guys, other people have had their bags lost at races. Like, it's not that uncommon for it to get, like, misfiled or whatever. Like, it's not a big deal. What happened on this race is there's a lot of not a big deals that all happened at once to me. That's the only reason I had such a negative response. But, like, it could have happened to anybody. And if other races, it probably did happen to other people. And where I had super fun and they did not. Like, that's, you guys get what I'm saying here? Okay? And so overall, people are what the actual opinions are going to seem worse than what the opinions really are. What would the response variable be? Opinions on how the race went. Okay? All right. Under coverage is something different. This is when a group is left out of being sampled. Me asking my students their opinions instead of asking a random sample of students. Which group would get left out? We said freshmen if I asked my students. If I went to study hall we would have undercoverage because seniors would get left out. Those are examples of undercoverage, and it's a really big deal when the opinions of the group that are left out is different from the opinions that aren't left out. Okay. Non-response. You guys, this happens when people don't respond. I should say it this way. Some people don't respond. That's probably a better. All right. The reason this is a problem is usually, anyway, the people who don't respond are different than the people who do respond. An example in this particular, of non-response. All right, let's say I'm working for OU. I went to OU. I'm working for OU's Alumni Association, and I want to know how are people doing after graduating from OU. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the things I want to know is about financial security. So I'm going to send a survey out to a random sample of OU grads and say, how much money did you make in the last year? Anonymous, whatever. Okay? Do you think that the number that comes back, the average salary I find, do you think it's going to be too high or too low? Too high. Why not? Why? The people who have lower salaries might be less likely to respond than if it has higher salaries. They just won't respond. Do you guys make sense? Okay, so if a group is left out, there's usually something that leaves them out, or there's a reason they're leaving themselves out. Okay? And then really the only thing you can do with that is do a lot of follow-up and a lot of follow-up and a lot of follow-up. All right. All right. Response bias. I'm going to give you an example of a survey question I could give you guys that might have some response bias in it. You ready? Please do not answer this question. I don't want to know the answer to this question. Don't answer it. Okay? Now, if I say, how many of you have ever cheated on a mathematics assignment? Versus I walk out of the room and let one of you anonymously gather the answers to those questions, am I going to get the same response when I ask versus one of you guys asking? Why not? People wouldn't want to tell me that. Well, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to tell me that. Right? Have you guys ever noticed, sometimes you guys have to take, drug and alcohol surveys, have you used this in the past month, past 6 months? You guys know what I'm talking about? Did we still make you guys take these? Have you? Okay. Or how many of you guys have ever gotten, one of those big, long surveys and it feels like you're answering the same question 5 times?
At the end of the sports season surveys, ranking all the questions.
And, when a student is being tested for, do they have ADHD or disability, sometimes what they'll do is send, forms for teachers to fill out, okay? And I swear to God, some of the questions are written the same thing 5 times on this form. It's 100 questions long. They drive me crazy, okay? Why do you think they give the same question 5 times?
See if you get the same answer.
It's not about what your answer is, it's are you giving the same answer each time? And it's about, trying to minimize this response bias. because people are not likely to lie 5 times in a row, or 5 times about the same. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Okay. So there's ways to counteract response bias. Now, there are other ways I could give you guys response bias. Okay. For example, next question. I'm teaching. Oh, I know. I'm just gonna sit. Okay. Next question. If my next survey question is gonna be, let's see, how should I say this? What do you guys want it to be about? What should I ask you guys about? Dogs. Dogs. Perfect. Have I ever shown you guys my babies? Look at them, my babies. What if I gave you a survey with just a picture on it, and then I said, what's better, cats or dogs? Am I influencing your response? By the way, the one in the middle rolled in something dead yesterday. She got an immediate bath when I got home.
Like you say that, then you might pick cats.
Yeah, then I could also be influencing your responses to the question. Yeah? I don't know what it was, but she came into our house and I was like, oh my God, you're disgusting. And she went straight to the bathtub and she wasn't happy about it, and I don't care. Okay, so response bias happens when the responses are influenced by an outside factor. Okay, whether it be the person asking the question is in and of itself the thing biasing your responses. Like me asking you guys if you've ever cheated on a math test is not going to get me good answers, right? Okay, so in that case, the outside factor is the person doing the asking. Whereas, a picture on the survey or the wording of a question, right? We could have a question that's worded pretty terribly. Cool? And then the last one we have is convenient sampling. We're going to take a break in a minute or two here. And so now, let's say I'm taking a break on that Friday and we're judging the hallways, and I'm just asking random people in the hallway. Are they random if I just ask random people in the hallway? Particularly with this question. If I ask which one's the best one and we're standing in the junior hallway. Or like, what if I go and ask you know what, I'm just going to ask my friends who are teachers. I've got a text thread with a couple people. I'm just going to send it out to there. Hey, which one are you voting for? What's the problem with that?
They might not want to tell you.
They might not want to tell me. Hey guys, do you think my friends have similar taste to me? Right? I can tell you that Mr. Ballinger and I are not on the same text thread. Okay? Like, if you had to guess who's on my text thread, it would include, let's see.
Dr. Lee.
Of course, Dr. Lee. Anyone else?
Mr. Hedge.
Hedge, Kelsey,
Mrs.
Anders, Grega, Wapner. Okay? And we all tend to have, the reason we're all such close friends is we have a lot of quality, things in common. You guys get what I'm saying here? So, who we think is cool, the hallways we like, might be completely different from a different friend group, right? There's the friend group of, the social studies teachers and Mr. Ginner and Mr. Richards are all buddies, right? They're going to have a completely different set of views than my crew, than another. You guys catch my drift? Okay. So, convenient sampling is really just asking nearby or convenient, right? And the thing is, what makes a group convenient also makes them different from the population as a whole? All right. Now, the first thing you might be asked to do, question-wise, is describe if I ask you to describe a type of bias that's going on in a study, okay? You need to describe two things. You need to describe the what and the how. The what is the source of the bias. What's happening? The how is how it affects the response variable. The race director is going to think he didn't do as good a job as he did. The resulting salaries reported to the Alumni Association are probably higher than the group as a whole. So you see that how that and there's direction to that. Like, is it bigger or smaller than what you expected? Okay. All right. So these are all like bad ways to gather samples. What's a good way? What's the right way to get a sample? How do I get a sample that's not biased? Here's a hint. I'm sorry? A census is but usually not feasible, right? The problem with the census, we'd love to run a census every single time. Censuses are not feasible, okay? So instead, we do take samples. We want random sample. So random sampling is the best defense against bias. If we have random sampling, we're allowed to assume the sample is representative. It's not guaranteed to be still, but we can assume it's going to be representative. And if we have a representative sample, we're allowed to use the sample to conclude about the population. Okay, this seems like a great place to take at least a little bit of a break because this has felt like a lot, right? Let's take 5 and then we'll come back together.